Welcome back to This Week. Time now to get the views of our media and political experts, MMA Creative Vice President, Democratic operative Mike Kopp, and her daily on 1510 WLAC syndicated talk show host, Steve Gill. Welcome, gentlemen. We listened to Lieutenant Governor Ron Ramsey, and I think he was being politically correct when he was discussing whether there was a political divide between the more conservative Republicans and the more moderate Republicans in the House and Senate and the governor's office. Clearly, at the least, there's a philosophical difference of opinion.
Yeah, it's not a partisan difference. It's a split within the Republican conservative base, which is the vast majority in the House and the Senate, and a few of the moderate Republicans, sometimes called rhinos, that are siding with the governor to try and block some of these issues. That, you know, you've got a 64-35 majority in the House. A lot of these things should be passed and would be passed if you would just bring them up for a vote.
Well, and what we heard in the interview with Lieutenant Governor Ramsey is there is no compromise. I mean, he's not going to back off his position on collective bargaining. And I think it's a test case between whether or not the governor has the political capital to spend on this kind of issue, or is he going to have to roll? And I think we're going to see a real showdown on this thing.
Let's talk a little bit more about that. He did say, I'm willing to compromise, but the compromise is that collective bargaining ends. Well, that's not much of a compromise, especially if you're with the TEA, and it's certainly not what the bill has been amended to in the House, which is where the governor stands. So there is a big difference here. And like you said, if this version comes through the Senate and then is approved by the House, it's a defeat for the governor.
Absolutely. And right now, at the early stages of his administration, when he's trying to get his first budget passed and he's looking at this deficit, he cannot afford to have a situation where he loses control or shows that he's getting rolled in any way in the legislature right now.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I'm not really sure what the compromise is, other than it's instead of Ramsey being able to say, I win, you lose, it becomes you lose, I win. Maybe you reverse the course on it. At the end of the day, this is a showdown that's going to continue. There is a conservative majority in the House, a conservative majority in the Senate, and I think once you see some of these issues come into fruition, whether it's tort reform, whether it's collective bargaining, there are going to be other issues coming down the pike. If the conservatives in the House and in the Senate start to get some traction, they will continue to move ahead with that. Right now, a lot of folks have been showing deference to the governor, deference to a new governor, deference to a new speaker. That's going to go away if they start also getting pushback from Tea Party conservatives, from their constituents, where all of a sudden these legislators are going to say, look, I love you, Speaker Harwell, but if I'm taking heat at home for backing you, right, I'm going to back myself before you.
And keep in mind, we're going into an election cycle next year already, and this is a real good test case to see how strong and united the Tea Party activists within the legislature can be on issues like this.
One other key issue that's just now coming up, where there's a big difference between what the governor wants and what the lieutenant governor wants, is whether judges should be elected. The lieutenant governor is sponsoring a bill saying, you're going to be elected. The governor says, I want to keep it the way it is. I make the appointments, then they sit for a yes or no retention vote.
I don't see how you can look at the Tennessee Constitution and look at anything other than the clear language that says judges must be elected. That's not we get a yes or no on whether they stay in. Incumbents might like that deal if they're in the legislature, but I don't think anybody would argue that we're going to go to a system in Tennessee where our state representatives, our state senators, or the governor are appointed and then retained. That is not an election. And if this was being dealt with properly in the courts, there's not a judge who could look at that and not rule that it's unconstitutional. The problem is the judges who would then have to run for re-election are getting to rule on whether it's unconstitutional.
And here's the other issue. I think if you look at this issue and collective bargaining, if you step back and look at the big picture, the governor is not driving the message right now in state government. The lieutenant governor and the Tea Party activists and legislature are the ones that are driving the message. The governor is being put in a position of having to react what they're talking about. That's not a position you want to be in when you're trying to be governor of the state.
One issue the governor has gotten a victory of sorts on is tenure, where it has been changed now from 3 years, where it becomes eligibility, to 5 years. But what hasn't been determined is what's going to be changed during that time period. So what actually happens, what do I have to do to improve my credibility to become tenured in 5 years that I don't have to do in 3 years?
And that's where that win by Governor Haslam is going to be challenged in court by the TEA. They're going to go to court, try to overturn it in the courts, even though they couldn't overturn it in the legislature, which this was supposedly part of some deal where collective bargaining will be watered down, I'll win tenure, but then the TEA is going to go in and try to beat tenure in the courts, so they win and win. And I think these folks need to understand you can't trust these folks to do what they're going to say they're going to do in a deal. They haven't done it in 30 or 40 years in the legislature. They're not going to start now.
And I think the TEA may be making a mistake by trying just to align themselves with some of the moderates. they're not the ones that are driving this ball right now. They're not controlling the message, and they're not driving the issues in the legislature right
Quickly
now.
on collective bargaining, is the TEA making a mistake by not embracing at least saying this is better than nothing, the compromise in the House? They come out opposed to that. That's really the best they're going to get if they get that.
Absolutely. And again, I think they're making a mistake by assuming that there's moderate voices that will tamper that down even more. That's not going to happen. We're looking at an all or nothing play here just in the next few weeks.
And there's political incentive for a lot of the conservatives to win the all or nothing play, both in terms of rolling Speaker Harwell, having an impact on trying to move Governor Haslam more to the right. There's everything to gain and nothing to lose on the conservative side.
The governor talked this year about the one-year anniversary of the $500 million. I misspoke, said $5 million. $500 million race to the top money that's come to Tennessee, which obviously has changed how kids are graded, how the whole system has changed to get the money here. Now we're seeing what it has done, and he says we're still a long way away from making the improvements that need to be made in this state.
Well, keep in mind it's a multi-year process. I mean, there's a lot of things from STEM learning to looking at these test scores. I mean, it takes a while for that stuff to get put in place. I think it's a little early to be deciding whether or not the thing's been a success. We knew from the start it was going to take several years.
And again, those test scores are going to take some results of looking at the progress we make. I talked to the governor the other day, and we discussed the fact that if you're moving students who are very low in their academic achievement, you can move them 10 or 20 points. If you've got a kid that's already at a 97 percentile, moving them 1 or 2 points isn't going to show a big bang. How do you evaluate that in the evaluation process on whether a teacher's doing a good job? You may be doing a great job moving a kid 2 points.
Nationally, the president taking heat from Republicans and Democrats on the U.S. action in Libya. He's now saying that this is going to be UN-controlled, not U.S. controlled, with about a minute to go. He's a tough one here. He's taking a beating on this one.
Well, he is, and unfortunately, we have NATO that's divided. I mean, who's going to be in charge? And then again, other nations are saying, what is the long-term strategy? And we don't seem to have one.
There doesn't seem to be a strategy, and as we look at the rebels starting to be in full defeat mode retreat, if Gaddafi stays in power, that is not a good thing either for us or for Libya.
And he seems to be regaining some of his power. Steve Gill, Mike Kopp, appreciate your time and your insight. Stay with us. This Week continues in a moment.